The devil a Puritan, or anything else he is, but a time server. 12th night. It was evening when Mr. Henry Morton perceived an old woman, wrapped in her tartan plaid, supported by a stout, stupid-looking fellow in hodden grey, approach the house of Milnwood. Old Mouse made her courtesy, but Cutty took the lead in addressing Morton. Indeed, he had previously stipulated with his mother that he was to manage matters his own way, for though he readily allowed his general inferiority of understanding, and filially submitted to the guidance of his mother on most ordinary occasions, yet he said, for getting a service, or getting forward in the world, he could some gate guard the wee pickle since he had gang muckle farther than hers, though she could crack like ony minister o' them a dot. Accordingly, he thus opened the conversation with young Morton: "A braw night this for the rye, your honour. The West Park will be breering bravely this e'en." "I do not doubt it, Cutty, but what can have brought your mother? This is your mother, is it not?" Cutty nodded. "What can have brought your mother and you down the water so late?" "Troth, stir, just what gars the old wives trot necessity, stir. I'm seeking for service, stir." "For service, Cutty, and at this time of the year? How comes that?" Mouse could forbear no longer. Proud alike of her cause and her sufferings, she commenced with an affected humility of tone: "It has pleased Heaven, and it like your honour, to distinguish us by a visitation, deals in the wife and nae good," whispered Cutty to his mother, "and ye come out wi' your wiggery, there'll no door open a door to us through the hale country." Then aloud and addressing Morton: "My mother's old, stir, and she has rather forgotten hersel in speaking to my leddy, that canna will bide to be contradicket, as I ken nae body likes it if they could help themselves, especially by her ain folk, and Mr. Harrison the steward, and Guttiel the butler, they're no very fond o' us, and it's ill sitting at Rome and striving wi' the Pope. I thought it best to flit before ill came to war, and here's a wee bit line to your honour frae a friend will maybe say some mair about it." Morton took the billet, and crimsoning up to the ears, between joy and surprise, read these words: "If you can serve these poor helpless people, you will oblige B." It was a few instants before he could attain composure enough to ask: "And what is your object, Cutty? And how can I be of use to you?" "Wark, stir, wark, and a service, is my object. A bit beeld for my mither and missile. We hae good plenishing o' our ain, if we had the cast o' a cart to bring it down, and milk and meal, and greens enow, for I'm gey gleg at mealtime, and sae is my mither, lang may it be sae, and, for the penny fee and a' that, I'll just leave it to the laird and you. I ken ye'll no see a poor lad ranged, if ye can help it." Morton shook his head. "For the meat and lodging, Cutty, I think I can promise something, but the penny fee will be a hard chapter, I doubt." "I'll tak my chance o't, stir," replied the candidate for service, "rather than gang down about Hamilton, or ony sic far country." "Well, step into the kitchen, Cutty, and I'll do what I can for you." The negotiation was not without difficulties. Morton had first to bring over the housekeeper, who made 1,000 objections, as usual, in order to have the pleasure of being besought and entreated, but, when she was gained over, it was comparatively easy to induce old Milnwood to accept of a servant, whose wages were to be in his own option. An outhouse was, therefore, assigned to Mouse and her son for their habitation, and it was settled that they were for the time to be admitted to eat of the frugal fare provided for the family, until their own establishment should be completed. As for Morton, he exhausted his own very slender stock of money in order to make Cutty such a present, under the name of alms, as might show his sense of the value of the recommendation delivered to him. "And now we're settled ance mair," said Cutty to his mother, "and if we're no sae bien and comfortable as we were up yonder, yet life's life onygate, and we're wide decent kirk-ganging folk o' your ain persuasion, mither, there will be nae quarrelling about that." "Of my persuasion, hinny," said the too enlightened Mouse, "weighs me for thy blindness and theirs." "Oh, Cutty, they are but in the court of the Gentiles, and will ne'er win farther ben, I doubt. They are but little better than the prelatists themselves. They wait on the ministry of that blinded man, Peter Poundtext, ance a precious teacher of the word, but now a backsliding pastor, that has, for the sake of stipend and family maintenance, forsaken the strict path, and gone astray after the black indulgence. Oh, my son, had ye but profited by the gospel doctrines ye hae heard in the glen of Bengoner, frae the dear Richard Rumbleberry, that sweet youth, who suffered martyrdom in the grass market, afore Candlemas. Didna ye hear him say, that Erastianism was as bad as prelacy, and that the indulgence was as bad as Erastianism? Heard ever ony body the like o' this, interrupted Cutty. We'll be driven out o' house and ha again afore we ken where to turn ourselves. Weege, mither, I hae just a word mair, and I hear ony mair o' your din afore folk, that is, for I dinna mind your clavers missile, they I set me sleeping, but if I hear ony mair din afore folk, as I was saying, about pound texts and rumbleberries, and doctrines and malignants, I as e'en turn a single sodger missile, or maybe a sergeant or a captain, if you plague me the mair, and let Rumbleberry and you gang to the deal fegither. I ne'er gat ony good by his doctrine, as ye see it, but a sour fit o' the bats why sitting amang the wud mosshags for 4 hours at a yoking, and the leddy cured me why some hickory-pickory, mair by token, and she had kenned how I came by the disorder, she wadna hae been in sic a hurry to mend it. Although groaning in spirit over the obdurate and impenitent state, as she thought it, of her son Cutty, Miles durst neither urge him farther on the topic, nor altogether neglect the warning he had given her. She knew the disposition of her deceased helpmate, whom this surviving pledge of their union greatly resembled, and remembered, that although submitting implicitly in most things to her boast of superior acuteness, he used on certain occasions, when driven to extremity, to be seized with fits of obstinacy, which neither remonstrance, flattery, nor threats were capable of overpowering. Trembling, therefore, at the very possibility of Cutty's fulfilling his threat, she put a guard over her tongue, and even when Poundtext was commended in her presence as an able and fructifying preacher, she had the good sense to suppress the contradiction which thrilled upon her tongue, and to express her sentiments no otherwise than by deep groans, which the hearers charitably construed to flow from a vivid recollection of the more pathetic parts of his homilies. How long she could have repressed her feelings it is difficult to say. An unexpected accident relieved her from the necessity. The Laird of Milnwood kept up all old fashions which were connected with economy. It was, therefore, still the custom in his house, as it had been universal in Scotland about 50 years before, that the domestics, after having placed the dinner on the table, sate down at the lower end of the board, and partook of the share which was assigned to them, in company with their masters. On the day, therefore, after Cutty's arrival, being the third from the opening of this narrative, old Robin, who was butler, valet-de-chamber, footman, gardener, and what not, in the house of Milnwood, placed on the table an immense charger of broth, thickened with oatmeal and colewort, in which ocean of liquid was indistinctly discovered, by close observers, 2 or 3 short ribs of lean mutton sailing to and fro. 2 huge baskets, one of bread made of barley and peas, and one of oatcakes, flanked this standing dish. A large boiled salmon would nowadays have indicated more liberal housekeeping, but at that period salmon was caught in such plenty in the considerable rivers in Scotland, that instead of being accounted a delicacy, it was generally applied to feed the servants, who were said sometimes to have stipulated that they should not be required to eat a food so luscious and surfeiting in its quality above 5 times a week. The large black jack, filled with very small beer of Milnwood's own brewing, was allowed to the company at discretion, as were the bannocks, cakes, and broth, but the mutton was reserved for the heads of the family, Mrs. Wilson included, and a measure of ale, somewhat deserving the name, was set apart in a silver tankard for their exclusive use. A huge kebbuck, a cheese, that is, made with ewe milk mixed with cow's milk, and a jar of salt butter, were in common to the company. To enjoy this exquisite cheer, was placed, at the head of the table, the old laird himself, with his nephew on the one side, and the favourite housekeeper on the other. At a long interval, and beneath the salt of course, sate old Robin, a meagre, half-starved serving-man, rendered cross and crippled by rheumatism, and a dirty drab of a housemaid, whom use had rendered callous to the daily exercitations which her temper underwent at the hands of her master and Mrs. Wilson. A barnman, a white-headed cowherd boy, with Cutty the new ploughman and his mother, completed the party. The other labourers belonging to the property resided in their own houses, happy at least in this, that if their cheer was not more delicate than that which we have described, they could eat their fill, unwatched by the sharp, envious grey eyes of Milnwood, which seemed to measure the quantity that each of his dependents swallowed, as closely as if their glances attended each mouthful in its progress from the lips to the stomach. This close inspection was unfavorable to Cutty, who sustained much prejudice in his new master's opinion, by the silent celerity with which he caused the victuals to disappear before him. And ever and anon Milnwood turned his eyes from the huge feeder to cast indignant glances upon his nephew, whose repugnance to rustic labor was the principal cause of his needing a ploughman, and who had been the direct means of his hiring this very cormorant. "Pay thee wages," quotha, said Milnwood to himself, "thou wilt eat in a week the value of mair than thou canst work for in a month." These disagreeable ruminations were interrupted by a loud knocking at the outer gate. It was a universal custom in Scotland, that, when the family was at dinner, the outer gate of the courtyard, if there was one, and if not, the door of the house itself, was always shut and locked, and only guests of importance, or persons upon urgent business, sought or received admittance at that time. Note: locking the door during dinner. The custom of keeping the door of a house or chateau locked during the time of dinner probably arose from the family being anciently assembled in the hall at that meal, and liable to surprise. But it was in many instances continued as a point of high etiquette, of which the following is an example. A considerable landed proprietor in Dumfriesshire, being a bachelor, without near relations, and determined to make his will, resolved previously to visit his two nearest kinsmen, and decide which should be his heir, according to the degree of kindness with which he should be received. Like a good clansman, he first visited his own chief, a baronet in rank, descendant and representative of one of the oldest families in Scotland. Unhappily the dinner bell had rung, and the door of the castle had been locked before his arrival. The visitor in vain announced his name and requested admittance, but his chief adhered to the ancient etiquette, and would on no account suffer the doors to be unbarred. Irritated at this cold reception, the old laird rode on to Sanquhar Castle, then the residence of the Duke of Queensberry, who no sooner heard his name, than, knowing well he had a will to make, the drawbridge dropped, and the gates flew open, the table was covered anew, his Grace's bachelor and intestate kinsman was received with the utmost attention and respect, and it is scarcely necessary to add, that upon his death some years after, the visitor's considerable landed property went to augment the domains of the ducal house of Queensberry. This happened about the end of the 17th century. The family of Milnwood were therefore surprised, and, in the unsettled state of the times, something alarmed, at the earnest and repeated knocking with which the gate was now assailed. Mrs. Wilson ran in person to the door, and, having reconnoitred those who were so clamorous for admittance, through some secret aperture with which most Scottish doorways were furnished for the express purpose, she returned wringing her hands in great dismay, exclaiming, "The redcoats! The redcoats!" "Robin Ploughman, what see the ye barnsman, Nevoy Harry, open the door, exclaimed old Milnwood, snatching up and slipping into his pocket the 2 or 3 silver spoons with which the upper end of the table was garnished, those beneath the salt being of goodly horn. "Speak them fair, sirs, Lord love ye, speak them fair, they winna bide throwing, we're a harried. While the servants admitted the troopers, whose oaths and threats already indicated resentment at the delay they had been put to, Cutty took the opportunity to whisper to his mother, "Now, ye daft old carline, mak yoursel deaf, ye hae made us a deaf air now, and let me speak for ye. I wad like ill to get my neck raxed for an auld wife's clashes, though ye be our mither." "Oh, hinny, I as be silent or thou sall come to ill," was the corresponding whisper of Mouse, "but bethink ye, my dear, them that deny the word will deny." Her admonition was cut short by the entrance of the lifeguardsmen, a party of 4 troopers, commanded by Bothwell. In they tramped, making a tremendous clatter upon the stone floor with the iron-shod heels of their large jack-boots, and the clash and clang of their long, heavy, basket-hilted broadswords. Milnwood and his housekeeper trembled, from well-grounded apprehensions of the system of exaction and plunder carried on during these domiciliary visits. Henry Morton was discomposed with more special cause, for he remembered that he stood answerable to the laws for having harboured Burleigh. The widow Mouse Hedrig, between fear for her son's life and an overstrained and enthusiastic zeal, which reproached her for consenting even tacitly to belie her religious sentiments, was in a strange quandary. The other servants quaked, for they knew not well what. Cutty alone, with the look of supreme indifference and stupidity which a Scottish peasant can at times assume as a mask for considerable shrewdness and craft, continued to swallow large spoonfuls of his broth, to command which he had drawn within his sphere the large vessel that contained it, and helped himself, amid the confusion, to a sevenfold portion. "What is your pleasure here, gentlemen?" said Milnwood, humbling himself before the satellites of power. "We come in behalf of the king," answered Bothwell. "Why the devil did you keep us so long standing at the door?" "We were at dinner," answered Milnwood, "and the door was locked, as is usual in landward towns." Note: the Scots retain the use of the word town in its comprehensive Saxon meaning, as a place of habitation. A mansion or a farmhouse, though solitary, is called the town. A landward town is a dwelling situated in the country, in this country. "I am sure, gentlemen, if I had kenned ony servants of our good king had stood at the door, but what you please to drink some ale, or some brandy, or a cup of canary sack, or claret wine," making a pause between each offer as long as a stingy bidder at an auction, who was loath to advance his offer for a favourite lot. "Claret for me," said one fellow. "I like ale better," said another, "provided it is right juice of John Barleycorn." "Better never was malted," said Milnwood. "I can hardly say a sae muckle for the claret. It's thin and cold, gentlemen." "Brandy will cure that," said a third fellow. "A glass of brandy to 3 glasses of wine prevents the curmuring in the stomach." "Brandy, ale, sack, and claret, we'll try them all," said Bothwell, "and stick to that which is best. There's good sense in that, if the damnedest Whig in Scotland had said it." Hastily, yet with a reluctant quiver of his muscles, Milnwood lugged out 2 ponderous keys, and delivered them to the gouvernante. "The housekeeper," said Bothwell, taking a seat, and throwing himself upon it, "is neither so young nor so handsome as to tempt a man to follow her to the Gauntrys, and devil a one here is there worth sending in her place. What's this, meat?" Searching with a fork among the broth, and fishing up a cutlet of mutton, "I think I could eat a bit. Why, it's as tough as if the devil's dam had hatched it." "If there is anything better in the house, sir," said Milnwood, alarmed at these symptoms of disapprobation. No," said Bothwell, "it's not worthwhile. I must proceed to business. You attend Poundtext, the Presbyterian parson, I understand, Mr. Morton?" Mr. Morton hastened to slide in a confession and apology. "By the indulgence of His Gracious Majesty and the Government, for I wad do nothing out of law, I hae nae objection whatever to the establishment of a moderate episcopacy, but only that I am a country-bred man, and the ministers are a hamelier kind of folk, and I can follow their doctrine better, and, with reverence, sir, it's a mair frugal establishment for the country." "Well, I care nothing about that," said Bothwell. "They are indulged, and there's an end of it. But, for my part, if I were to give the law, never a crop-eared cur of the whole pack should bark in a Scotch pulpit. However, I am to obey commands. There comes the liquor. Put it down, my good old lady." He decanted about 1/2 of a quart bottle of claret into a wooden kay or bicker, and took it off at a draught. "You did your good wine injustice, my friend. It's better than your brandy, though that's good too. Will you pledge me to the king's health?" "With pleasure," said Milnwood, "in ale, but I never drink claret, and keep only a very little for some honoured friends." "Like me, I suppose," said Bothwell, and then, pushing the bottle to Henry, he said, "Here, young man, pledge you the king's health." Henry filled a moderate glass in silence, regardless of the hints and pushes of his uncle, which seemed to indicate that he ought to have followed his example, in preferring beer to wine. "Well," said Bothwell, "have ye all drank the toast? What is that old wife about?" "Give her a glass of brandy, she shall drink the king's health." "By, if your honour pleases," said Cutty, with great stolidity of aspect, "this is my mither, stir, and she's as deaf as Coralin. We canna mak her hear day nor door. But if your honour pleases, I am ready to drink the king's health for her in as mony glasses of brandy as ye think necessary." I dare swear you are, answered Bothwell. You look like a fellow that would stick to brandy. Help thyself, man, all's free where'er I come to. Tom, help the maid to a comfortable cup, though she's but a dirty jild neither. Fill round once more. Here's to our noble commander, Colonel Graham of Claverhouse. What the devil is the old woman groaning for? She looks as very a Whig as ever sate on a hillside. Do you renounce the covenant, good woman? Whilk covenant is your honour meaning? Is it the covenant of works, or the covenant of grace? Said Cuddy, interposing. Any covenant, all covenants that ever were hatched, answered the trooper. Mither, cried Cuddy, affecting to speak as to a deaf person, the gentleman wants to ken if you will renounce the covenant of works? With all my heart, Cuddy, said Mouse, and pray that my feet may be delivered from the snare thereof. Come, said Bothwell, the old dame has come more frankly off than I expected. Another cup round, and then we'll proceed to business. You have all heard, I suppose, of the horrid and barbarous murder committed upon the person of the Archbishop of St. Andrews, by 10 or 11 armed fanatics? All started and looked at each other. At length Milnwood himself answered, they had heard of some such misfortune, but were in hopes it had not been true. There is the relation published by government, old gentleman, what do you think of it? Think, sir? W.H., whatever the council please to think of it, stammered Milnwood. I desire to have your opinion more explicitly, my friend, said the dragoon, authoritatively. Milnwood's eyes hastily glanced through the paper to pick out the strongest expressions of censure with which it abounded, in gleaning which he was greatly aided by their being printed in italics. I think it a bloody and execrable murder and parricide, devised by hellish and implacable cruelty, utterly abominable, and a scandal to the land. Well said, old gentleman, said the querist, here's to thee, and I wish you joy of your good principles. You owe me a cup of thanks for having taught you them. Nay, thou shalt pledge me in thine own sack. Sour ale sits ill upon a loyal stomach. Now comes your turn, young man. What think you of the matter in hand? I should have little objection to answer you, said Henry, if I knew what right you had to put the question. The Lord preserve us, said the old housekeeper, to ask the like that at a trooper, when a folk can they do whatever they like through the hail country, why man and woman, beast and body. The old gentleman exclaimed, in the same horror at his nephew's audacity, hold your peace, sir, or answer the gentleman discreetly. Do you mean to affront the king's authority in the person of a sergeant of the Life Guards? Silence, all of you, exclaimed Bothwell, striking his hand fiercely on the table. Silence, every one of you, and hear me. You ask me for my right to examine you, sir. To Henry, my cockade and my broadsword are my commission, and a better one than ever old Null gave to his Roundheads, and if you want to know more about it, you may look at the Act of Council empowering His Majesty's officers and soldiers to search for, examine, and apprehend suspicious persons, and, therefore, once more, I ask you your opinion of the death of Archbishop Sharp. It's a new touchstone we have got for trying people's mettle. Henry had, by this time, reflected upon the useless risk to which he would expose the family by resisting the tyrannical power which was delegated to such rude hands. He therefore read the narrative over, and replied, composedly, I have no hesitation to say, that the perpetrators of this assassination have committed, in my opinion, a rash and wicked action, which I regret the more, as I foresee it will be made the cause of proceedings against many who are both innocent of the deed, and as far from approving it as myself. While Henry thus expressed himself, Bothwell, who bent his eyes keenly upon him, seemed suddenly to recollect his features. Aha! My friend Captain Popinjay, I think I have seen you before, and in very suspicious company. I saw you once, answered Henry, in the public house of the town of. And with whom did you leave that public house, youngster? Was it not with John Balfour of Burley, one of the murderers of the Archbishop? I did leave the house with the person you have named, answered Henry. I scorn to deny it, but, so far from knowing him to be a murderer of the primate, I did not even know at the time that such a crime had been committed. Lord have mercy on me, I am ruined, utterly ruined and undone, exclaimed Milnwood. That Collins' tongue will rend the head off his own shoulders, and waste my goods to the very grey cloak on my back. But you knew Burleigh, continued Bothwell, still addressing Henry, and regardless of his uncle's interruption, to be an intercommune rebel and traitor, and you knew the prohibition to deal with such persons. You knew that, as a loyal subject, you were prohibited to reset, supply, or intercommune with this attainted traitor, to correspond with him by word, writ, or message, or to supply him with meat, drink, house, harbour, or victual, under the highest pains. You knew all this, and yet you broke the law. Henry was silent. Where did you part from him? Continued Bothwell. Was it in the highway, or did you give him harbourage in this very house? In this house, said his uncle. He dared not for his neck bring ony traitor into a house of mine. Dare he deny that he did so? Said Bothwell. As you charge it to me as a crime, said Henry, you will excuse my saying anything that will criminate myself. Oh, the lands of Milnwood, the body lands of Milnwood, that have been in the name of Morton Twa 100 years, exclaimed his uncle, they are barking and fleeing, outfield and infield, haw and home. No, sir, said Henry, you shall not suffer on my account. I own, he continued, addressing Bothwell, I did give this man a night's lodging, as to an old military comrade of my father. But it was not only without my uncle's knowledge, but contrary to his express general orders. I trust, if my evidence is considered as good against myself, it will have some weight in proving my uncle's innocence. Come, young man, said the soldier, in a somewhat milder tone, you're a smart spark enough, and I am sorry for you, and your uncle here is a fine old Trojan, kinder, I see, to his guests than himself, for he gives us wine and drinks his own thin ale. Tell me all you know about this Burleigh, what he said when you parted from him, where he went, and where he is likely now to be found, and, d-n it, I'll wink as hard on your share of the business as my duty will permit. There's 1,000 merks on the murdering Whiggamore's head, and I could but light on it. Come, out with it. Where did you part with him? You will excuse my answering that question, sir, said Morton. The same cogent reasons which induced me to afford him hospitality at considerable risk to myself and my friends, would command me to respect his secret, if, indeed, he had trusted me with any. So you refuse to give me an answer, said Bothwell. I have none to give, returned Henry. Perhaps I could teach you to find one, by tying a piece of lighted match betwixt your fingers, answered Bothwell. Oh, for pity's sake, sir, said old Alison apart to her master, gie them siller, it's siller they're seeking, they'll murder Mr. Henry, and yoursel next. Milnwood groaned in perplexity and bitterness of spirit, and, with a tone as if he was giving up the ghost, exclaimed, if 20 puns would make up this unhappy matter, my master, insinuated Alison to the sergeant, would gie 20 puns sterling puns Scotch, ye-bh, interrupted Milnwood, for the agony of his avarice overcame alike his puritanic precision and the habitual respect he entertained for his housekeeper. Puns sterling, insisted the housekeeper, if ye wad hae the goodness to look ower the lad's misconduct, he's that dar ye might tear him to pieces, and ye wad ne'er get a word out o' him, and it wad do ye little good, I'm sure, to burn his bonny finger ends. Why, said Bothwell, hesitating, I don't know, most of my cloth would have the money, and take off the prisoner too, but I bear a conscience, and if your master will stand to your offer, and enter into a bond to produce his nephew, and if all in the house will take the test oath, I do not know, but, oh I, sir, cried Mrs. Wilson, ony test, ony oaths ye please. And then aside to her master, haste ye away, sir, and get the siller, or they will burn the house about our lugs. Old Milnwood cast a rueful look upon his adviser, and moved off, like a piece of Dutch clockwork, to set at liberty his imprisoned angels in this dire emergency. Meanwhile, Sergeant Bothwell began to put the test oath with such a degree of solemn reverence as might have been expected, being just about the same which is used to this day in His Majesty's Custom House. What's your name, woman? Allison Wilson, sir. You, Allison Wilson, solemnly swear, certify, and declare that you judge it unlawful for subjects, under pretext of reformation, or any other pretext whatsoever, to enter into leagues and covenants. Here the ceremony was interrupted by a strife between Cutty and his mother, which, long conducted in whispers, now became audible. Oh, wisht, mither, wisht. They're upon a communing, oh. Wisht, and they'll agree we'll anoosh now. I will not wisht, Cutty, replied his mother. I will uplift my voice and spare not. I will confound the man of sin, even the scarlet man, and through my voice shall Mr. Henry be freed from the net of the fowler. She has her leg o'er the harrows now, said Cutty. Stop her walkin', I see her cocked up behind a dragoon on her way to the toll booth. I find my own legs tied below a horse's belly. She has just mustered up her sermon, and there, why that grain out it comes, and we are ruined, horse and foot. And ye think to come here, said Mouse, her withered hand shaking in concert with her keen, though wrinkled visage, animated by zealous wrath, and emancipated, by the very mention of the test, from the restraints of her own prudence, and Cutty's admonition, ye think to come here, why your soul-killing, saint-seducing, conscience-confounding oaths, and tests, and bans, your snares, and your traps, and your gins? Surely it is in vain that a net is spread in the sight of any bird. What, good dame, said the soldier. Here's a Whig miracle, egad. The old wife has got both her ears and tongue, and we are like to be driven deaf in our turn. Not go to, hold your peace, and remember whom you talk to, you old idiot. Way do I talk to? Sirs, our will may the sorrowing land can what ye are. Malignant adherents ye are to the prelates, foul props to a feeble and filthy cause, bloody beasts of prey, and burdens to the earth. Upon my soul, said Bothwell, astonished as a mastiff dog might be should a hen partridge fly at him in defense of her young, this is the finest language I ever heard. Can't you give us some more of it? Some merote, said Mouse, clearing her voice with a preliminary cough. I will take up my testimony against you Anson again. Philistines ye are, and Edomites leopards are ye, and foxes evening wolves, that gnaw not the bones till the morrow, wicked dogs, that compass about the chosen, thrusting kine, and pushing bulls of Bashan, piercing serpents ye are, and allied baith in name and nature with the great red dragon. Revelations, 12th chapter, 3rd and 4th verses. Here the old lady stopped, apparently much more from lack of breath than of matter. Curse the old hag, said one of the dragoons, gag her, and take her to headquarters. For shame, Andrews, said Bothwell, remember the good lady belongs to the fair sex, and uses only the privilege of her tongue. But, hark ye, good woman, every bull of Bashan and red dragon will not be so civil as I am, or be contented to leave you to the charge of the constable and ducking stool. In the meantime I must necessarily carry off this young man to headquarters. I cannot answer to my commanding officer to leave him in a house where I have heard so much treason and fanaticism. Say now, mither, what ye hae doon, whispered Cutty. There's the Philistines, as ye see them, are gone to worry awa Mr. Henry, and a wire nashgab, deal beyond. Haud your tongue, ye cowardly loon, said the mother, and lay na the white on me, if you and they thoughtless gluttons, that are sitting staring like cows bursting on clover, wad testify why your hands as I have testified why my tongue, they should never harl the precious young lad awa to captivity. While this dialogue passed, the soldiers had already bound and secured their prisoner. Milnwood returned at this instant, and, alarmed at the preparations he beheld, hastened to proffer to Bothwell, though with many a grievous groan, the purse of gold which he had been obliged to rummage out as ransom for his nephew. The trooper took the purse with an air of indifference, weighed it in his hand, chucked it up into the air, and caught it as it fell, then shook his head, and said, There's many a merry night in this nest of yellow boys, but d—n me if I dare venture for them. That old woman has spoken too loud, and before all the men too. Hark ye, old gentleman, to Milnwood, I must take your nephew to headquarters, so I cannot, in conscience, keep more than is my due as civility money. Then opening the purse, he gave a gold piece to each of the soldiers, and took 3 to himself. Now, said he, you have the comfort to know that your kinsman, young Captain Popinjay, will be carefully looked after and civilly used, and the rest of the money I return to you. Milnwood eagerly extended his hand. Only you know, said Bothwell, still playing with the purse, that every landholder is answerable for the conformity and loyalty of his household, and that these fellows of mine are not obliged to be silent on the subject of the fine sermon we have had from that old Puritan in the tartan plaid there, and I presume you are aware that the consequences of delation will be a heavy fine before the council. Good sergeant, worthy captain, exclaimed the terrified miser, I am sure there is no person in my house, to my knowledge, would give cause of offence. Nay, answered Bothwell, you shall hear her give her testimony, as she calls it, herself to, you fellow, to Cutty, stand back, and let your mother speak her mind. I see she's primed and loaded again since her first discharge. Lord! Noble sir, said Cutty, an old wife's tongue's but a feckless matter to mak sic a fash about. Neither my father nor me ever minded muckle what our mither said. Hold your peace, my lad, while you are well, said Bothwell. I promise you I think you are slyer than you would like to be supposed. Come, good dame, you see your master will not believe that you can give us so bright a testimony. Maz's zeal did not require this spur to set her again on full career. Woe to the compliers and carnal self-seekers, she said, that daub over and drown their consciences by complying with wicked exactions, and giving mammon of unrighteousness to the sons of Belial, that it may make their peace with them. It is a sinful compliance, a base confederacy with the enemy. It is the evil that Menahem did in the sight of the Lord, when he gave 1,000 talents to Pul, king of Assyria, that his hand might be with him. 2 Kings, 15 chapter, 19 verse. It is the evil deed of Ahab, when he sent money to Tiglath-Pileser, see the same 2 Kings, 16 and aught. And if it was accounted a backsliding even in godly Hezekiah, that he complied with Sennacherib, giving him money, and offering to bear that which was put upon him, see the same 2 Kings, 18 chapter, 14 and 15 verses, even so it is with them that in this contumacious and backsliding generation pays localities and fees, and cess and fines, to greedy and unrighteous publicans, and extortions and stipends to hireling curates, dumb dogs which bark not, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber, and gives gifts to be helps and hires to our oppressors and destroyers. They are all like the casters of a lot with them, like the preparing of a table for the troop, and the furnishing a drink offering to the number. There's a fine sound of doctrine for you, Mr. Morton. How like you that, said Bothwell, or how do you think the council will like it? I think we can carry the greatest part of it in our heads without a Kilvine pen and a pair of tablets, such as you bring to conventicles. She denies paying cess, I think, Andrews? Yes, by G, said Andrews, and she swore it was a sin to give a trooper a pot of ale, or ask him to sit down to a table. You hear, said Bothwell, addressing Milnwood, but it's your own affair, and he proffered back the purse with its diminished contents, with an air of indifference. Milnwood, whose head seemed stunned by the accumulation of his misfortunes, extended his hand mechanically to take the purse. Are ye mad, said his housekeeper, in a whisper, tell them to keep it, they will keep it either by fair means or foul, and it's our only chance to make them quiet. I canna do it, Ailey, I canna do it, said Milnwood, in the bitterness of his heart. I canna part why the siller I hae counted a say off an hour, to they blackguards. Then I maun do it missile, Milnwood, said the housekeeper, or see a gang rang thegither. My master, sir, she said, addressing Bothwell, canna think o' taking back onything at the hand of an honourable gentleman like you. He implores ye to pit up the siller, and be as kind to his nephew as ye can, and be favourable in reporting our dispositions to government, and let us tak nae rang for the daft speeches of an old jawed. Here she turned fiercely upon Mouse, to indulge herself for the effort which it cost her to assume a mild demeanour to the soldiers, a daft old Whig randy, that ne'er was in the house, foul affair, till yesterday afternoon, and that Sol ne'er crossed the doorstane again and aince I had her out o't. I, whispered Cuddy to his parent, Ian I ken we wad be put to our travels again whene'er ye sold get 3 words spoken to an end. I was sure that wad be the upshot o't, mither. Wisht, my bairn, said she, and dinna murmur at the cross their doorstane. Will I what I'll ne'er cross their doorstane. There's nae mark on their threshold for a signal that the destroying angel should pass by. They'll get a backcast o' his hand yet, that thing to see muckle o' the creature and say little o' the creator to say muckle o' world's gear and say little o' a broken covenant to say muckle about they ween pieces o' yellow muck, and say little about the pure gold o' the scripture to say muckle about their ain friend and kinsman, and say little about the elect, that are tried white hornings, harassings, huntings, searchings, chasings, catchings, imprisonments, torturings, banishments, headings, hangings, dismemberings, and quarterings quick, for by the hundreds forced from their own habitations to the deserts, mountains, muirs, mosses, mossfloes, and peat-hags, there to hear the word like bread eaten in secret. She's at the covenant now, Sergeant, shall we not have her away? Said one of the soldiers. You be d, said Bothwell, aside to him, cannot you see she's better where she is, so long as there is a respectable, sponsible, money-broking heriter, like Mr. Morton of Milnwood, who has the means of atoning her trespasses? Let the old mother fly to raise another brood, she's too tough to be made anything of herself. Here, he cried, one other round to Milnwood in his roof-tree, and to our next merry meeting with him, which I think will not be far distant, if he keeps such a fanatical family. He then ordered the party to take their horses, and pressed the best in Milnwood's stable into the king's service to carry the prisoner. Mrs. Wilson, with weeping eyes, made up a small parcel of necessaries for Henry's compelled journey, and as she bustled about, took an opportunity, unseen by the party, to slip into his hand a small sum of money. Bothwell and his troopers, in other respects, kept their promise, and were civil. They did not bind their prisoner, but contented themselves with leading his horse between a file of men. They then mounted, and marched off with much mirth and laughter among themselves, leaving the Milnwood family in great confusion. The old laird himself, overpowered by the loss of his nephew, and the unavailing outlay of £20 sterling, did nothing the whole evening but rock himself backwards and forwards in his great leathern easy-chair, repeating the same lamentation, of ruined on his sides, harried and undone, body and goods. Mrs. Alison Wilson's grief was partly indulged and partly relieved by the torrent of invectives with which she accompanied Mouse and Cuddy's expulsion from Milnwood. Ill luck be in the graining course o' thee. The prettiest lad in Clydesdale this day maun be a sufferer, and afore you and your daft wiggery. Kiwa, replied Mouse, I trow ye are yet in the bonds of sin, and in the gall of iniquity, to grudge your bonniest and best in the cause of him that gave ye a ye. I promise I hae done as muckle for Mr. Harry as I wad do for my ain, for if Cuddy was found worthy to bear testimony in the grass market, and there's good hope o't, said Alison, unless you and he change your courses. And if, continued Mouse, disregarding the interruption, the bloody dogs and the flattering Ziphites were to seek to ensnare me with the proffer of his remission upon sinful compliances, I wad persevere, nathless, in lifting my testimony against popery, prelacy, antinomianism, Erastianism, lapsarianism, sublapsarianism, and the sins and snares of the times. I wad cry as a woman in labor against the black indulgence, that has been a stumbling block to professors. I wad uplift my voice as a powerful preacher. Hout tout, mither, cried Cuddy, interfering and dragging her off forcibly, dinna deave the gentlewoman why your testimony. Ye hae preached enough for 6 days. Ye preached us out o' our Kenny Freehouse in Good Kailyard, and out o' this new city o' refuge afore our hinder end was will hafted in it, and ye hae preached Mr. Harry Awa to the prison, and ye hae preached 20 punds out o' the laird's pocket that he likes as ill to quit why, and say ye may ha to say ye for a wee while, without preaching me up a ladder and down a toe. Say, come awa, the family hae had enough o' your testimony to mind it for a wee while. So saying he dragged off Mouse, the words, testimony, covenant, malignance, indulgence, still thrilling upon her tongue, to make preparations for instantly renewing their travels in quest of an asylum. Ilfard, crazy, crack-brained gowk, that she is, exclaimed the housekeeper, as she saw them depart, to set up to be a sae muckle better than ither folk, the old besom, and to bring a sae muckle distress on a douse quiet family. If it hadna been that I am mair than half a gentlewoman by my station, I wad hae tried my 10 nails in the wizen hide o' her.